For most of my life, I've dealt with uncertainties about myself. These uncertainties weren't so much about my gender identity. I identify as male and have no conflicting feelings about that. However, I also felt a strong connection to my feminine side, which I tried to suppress, influenced by societal expectations of what is considered masculine and feminine. It was seen as acceptable for girls to embrace more traditionally masculine behaviors, but boys who exhibited feminine traits were often labeled as sissies. Eventually, I discovered the idea of cross-dressing and began to take every opportunity to explore it. When I was home alone, I would secretly try on my mom's clothes. I was never caught in the act, but looking back, I realized my parents likely knew and simply chose not to address it. I had left enough subtle signs that it would have been hard for them not to notice. As I got older, cross-dressing became more of a fetish rather than a form of self-expression. I didn't have any illusions of passing as female, but I did find comfort in wearing women's clothing and fantasizing about embodying a female role during intimacy, despite identifying as hetero. Though I don't feel attraction to men, I can admit that if I ever encountered a certain male celebrity, the situation might cause me to rethink things. Relationships have always been challenging for me. My anxiety and other psychological issues made it difficult to open up to others and pursue meaningful connections. I was in one serious relationship, which started when my girlfriend essentially made the first move. I had gone to her dorm to help with her computer, and afterward, she sat on my lap and kissed me. That led to a relationship that lasted almost 2 years, but ultimately, she cheated on me, and the relationship ended. This was the second time it happened, and the first betrayal had already soured things. We tried to work through it the first time, but the second time left no room for reconciliation. During our time together, we went to a costume party where I dressed as a cheerleader and she as a football player. She had discovered my interest in cross-dressing after finding my browsing history. While she mostly accepted it, it was clear she preferred a more traditional, masculine man, which I wasn't. I always felt like the secondary partner in the relationship. It wasn't until many years later, about 15 years without a serious relationship, that I figured out what I really wanted, though I wasn't sure how to achieve it. What I desired was a female-led relationship, FLR. I had read stories about feminine dominance but had never seriously considered it as something I wanted or even something that was possible. Stories were just stories, right? As I explored this idea further, I began to realize how uncertain I was about how to make these fantasies a reality. I found some online groups and forums dedicated to FLRs and domination, but it only added to my confusion about how to move forward. Then, I came across the website of a local dominatrix who offered her services after a brief vetting process. She emphasized that her services were non-intimate, in line with the state's prostitution laws. Despite my struggles with dating and approaching women, here I was, emailing a woman about potentially engaging in her services. In my mind, I rationalized that paying for a service might be more likely to lead to success than asking someone out casually. After exchanging several emails, we agreed to meet at a local restaurant for lunch. She assured me that it would be an open and non-judgmental conversation where I could be honest about my desires, and we could discuss how to proceed with scheduling a session. I was to arrive at the restaurant before our scheduled meeting time, dressed appropriately, no sneakers, hats, t-shirts, or jeans, and secure a booth. I was instructed to leave a note with the hostess, asking her to escort the woman to me upon her arrival. As I waited at the table, my nerves were all over the place. I wasn't sure what would happen or what to expect. It still wasn't too late for me to back out if I wanted. I had brought an envelope with a consultation fee inside, which included a non-refundable deposit for the session. But I was anxious and uncertain about the legalities. Could I still be charged with solicitation? Where do prostitution laws actually apply? I kept checking the door, watching for her to arrive, knowing what she looked like based on the photos on her website and our email exchanges. She was about 15 to 20 minutes late, but that didn't bother me much. I saw her walk in, approach the hostess, and then she was led to my table. When she sat down across from me, I held my breath, my nerves on edge. I wasn't sure how to feel. She was a beautiful woman, probably around my age, with bright red hair cut just above her shoulders. She looked at me and asked my name. I confirmed both my name and hers, but avoided using the term mistress out of discretion, in case anyone nearby overheard. We ordered drinks, both choosing non-alcoholic options, and had the same meal, a large slice of carrot cake she spoke highly of, and began our conversation. We talked about various things, her past, mine, my lack of success in dating, and my difficulty in approaching women. She smiled as she looked up from her coffee, stirring in a stick of sugar, and said, "Yes, you can." It was a comment on how I had been able to approach her and make contact, which was true, but it still felt different than trying to ask someone out in public. I told her I had no experience with SNM or DNS activities but was interested in exploring them. She smiled and said she enjoyed working with beginners. I explained that my fantasies often involved feminization and crossdressing, and I was curious about exploring masochism, though I wasn't sure how much pain I could handle. I also mentioned a minor seizure disorder I have, but assured her it wouldn't interfere. I explained that I don't have full convulsions, just a brief moment of being unaware, and that it wouldn't be a problem. She said she would follow up with me and we could proceed as I wished. That night, through email, we arranged a time for the session and she gave me the next set of instructions. She mentioned it would be impractical for her to have clothing for every possible size, so I'd need to bring my own. She could provide wigs, makeup, and other accessories, but I needed to bring undergarments, a dress, skirt, or similar attire, and shoes, preferably with a lower heel, in case I wanted to walk. She also advised that I remove as much body hair as I felt comfortable with, especially if I wanted her to touch my privates. Though there would be no interaction, she mentioned she would still touch things but wouldn't do so if there was too much hair. She jokingly said, "You're wondering where to get all of this, right? Goodwill, you silly thing." I spent a considerable amount of time at home trying to figure out my sizes for women's clothing. Translating shoe and bust sizes was easy, but I struggled with dress sizes. There didn't seem to be a consistent sizing system, and without having hips like a woman, I couldn't figure out how to make the numbers work. I went to Goodwill with my measurements, but despite my efforts, I couldn't find anything I liked in my size. The items that seemed to match my measurements didn't fit right, either too big or too small. I had been excited about the idea of buying everything in person, as she suggested, for the extra thrill. However, I ended up ordering most of the clothes from Amazon after doing more research on the sizes. I was able to figure out what would work for me and found a nice dress and shoes there. Given my male shoe size, finding women's shoes in wide was a challenge. I also went to a department store to buy undergarments and hosiery, using the self-checkout to avoid feeling embarrassed. The dress I chose was a cute midi style, though it came with a mostly unnecessary belt. It seemed to fit well, although I couldn't tell for sure since I wasn't able to zip it up completely on my own. Seriously, why do dresses have zippers that are so hard to do by yourself? I bought regular slip-on stockings, as they seemed more fun than pantyhose. I also already had a mastectomy bra and chest forms, though I'd never gone out in public wearing them. I just liked the feeling of wearing them sometimes. With about a week left before the session, I decided to remove my body hair and maintain it so I wouldn't have any issues like razor burns or nicks on the day of the session. I used a strong depilatory cream, which she had recommended, that worked well on sensitive areas like my pointers and privates. I went ahead and removed as much hair as I could from my neck down, leaving some areas like my forearms, back, and certain other hard-to-reach spots untouched. It had been a while since I'd done this. I used to shave occasionally for when I dressed up, but it wasn't something I did regularly. After shaving, I made sure to apply moisturizer and then kept up with regular shaving every other day to stay smooth. The day of the session arrived. It was scheduled for 3 p.m., and I was nervous the whole day, as I had taken the day off from work. I could hardly contain my excitement and anxiety. There was still that nagging thought in the back of my mind that this could go terribly wrong, that it might be a trap leading to either legal trouble or getting robbed and having my car stolen. But I took a deep breath and told myself that if this was a scam, it was an incredibly elaborate one, considering the detailed communication I'd had with her over time. About 20 minutes before I was supposed to leave for her dungeon, which was located in an old church in a neighborhood, a place she mentioned she enjoyed using for its blasphemous touch, I gave myself another close shave and gathered up my clothing and other items in a reusable grocery bag. I was still very nervous, but I was determined to follow through. I arrived near the location about 15 minutes early, trying to time it just right without being too early. I circled the area, parked in the church's driveway, and noticed there weren't any other cars around. The instructions were clear. I was to walk in the front door, place my payment in a box near the foyer, take off my shoes, and sit on a nearby bench to wait. I wasn't supposed to call out to her or enter the dungeon, the church's sanctuary, on my own. Once inside, I was to respect her space and follow her lead. I walked up to the door, pushed the latch, and it was locked. I didn't know what to make of it, but I didn't do anything further. I simply waited outside on the porch. The church, though converted, looked like a regular house on a quiet neighborhood street. From the outside, it could have been any other home, but there were certain details that gave away its true purpose: Victorian-style patio furniture and the colors of the paint. A few minutes passed when another car turned the corner and parked in front of the building. Through the windows, I saw that it was her. She greeted me with a warm, "Hello, Mark," and went to unlock the door. She explained she was running late due to a lunch meeting and had tried texting me to let me know, but I hadn't received the message. Either she dialed my number incorrectly or there was an issue with the phone network. She was still strikingly attractive to me, and I couldn't help but notice her bright red hair. She was dressed in a stylish thigh-high skirt, dark-colored tights, and a pretty blouse. We entered the entryway of the church, and she locked the door behind us. She told me she'd be ready in a few minutes, then entered the sanctuary, which was separated by curtains from the foyer. I took out the envelope with her payment and placed it in a nearby box, then sat down, removed my shoes, and waited. I could hear her movements through the curtains, her heels clicking on the floors, rummaging through things, and the sound of music from a radio she had turned on. In a nearby curio cabinet, I noticed various old-fashioned devices, including what seemed like an 80-year-old vibrator. I don't know how long I sat there, but my heart was racing, and I was still very nervous, unsure of what to feel, think, or expect. This could still go terribly wrong. I nervously grasped the handle of my shopping bag. Then, I heard her heels clicking again, this time getting closer. She walked through the curtain and stood before me. She had only added a corset-like garment to her outfit, which made her look tall and imposing. She placed her hands on her hips, arched an eyebrow, and asked, "Ready?" I quietly nodded and replied, "Yes," still shy and nervous. I stood up and followed her through the curtain into the sanctuary. The pews were gone, replaced by ornate couches along one side of the room. The other side featured various BDSM-related toys and equipment, a cage, a St. Andrew's cross, and a rack of whips and chains. I gulped. The far corner had been converted into a kitchenette, and at the front of the room was a dais with a large, regal-looking chair and a kneeler at its foot. She took my bag and asked, "Is this for us to play with?" "Yes," I replied. "Good. Now, I want you to go into the bathroom over there, undress, and come back out to kneel and wait for me, whether I'm there or not. Do you understand?" Her tone was commanding, like a mother giving instructions to a child. "Yes, mistress." She smiled and said, "Good boy." I walked into the bathroom, still shaking with nervousness as I began to undress. I'm not very comfortable with my body. I know I'm not particularly attractive, not in the best shape, and my privates are not exactly impressive. It was hard enough revealing myself to my first girlfriend, and now I was about to do it in front of a near stranger. But I trusted her professionalism and that she wouldn't judge me. I folded my clothes, opened the bathroom door, and walked out, placing my clothes on a nearby bench. She was seated in her chair, facing forward with only a slight glance in my direction as I stepped out. I cautiously approached her and knelt at her feet on the kneeler. She gave me a slight smile and said, "Show me what you brought." I took my bag and began pulling out the items: the dress, pantyhose, panties, shoes, bra, and chest forms. "Are those your chests?" she asked. "Yes, mistress." Let me see them. I opened the bag and showed her the items I brought. She smiled, inspecting the chest forms. They were fairly large, though probably smaller than what would realistically fit my size. Still, they had a decent heft to them. After setting the items aside, she looked at me sternly and said, "Look down." I obeyed. "Remember, you are mine now, and you will obey me. Understand?" "Yes, mistress." She stood up, took my hand, and led me to the area where most of the toys and equipment were. As I looked up to follow, she turned to me and said, "Don't look up. You do not look at me unless I give you permission. Understand?" "Yes, mistress." I lowered my head, feeling like a chastised child, as she guided me to a focal area in the play section of the room. The back corner of the room was lined with red curtains, hiding various tools, whips, chains, and restraints. She positioned me in the center of this area, turned me toward the middle of the room, and instructed me to place my hands out in front of me. I complied. She walked away, then returned with a pair of handcuffs, different from regular ones. These had grasping handles and were not connected to each other. She placed them on my wrists, then pressed a switch on the wall. A mechanical noise filled the room, and I glanced up slightly to see a bar lowering from the ceiling. As I looked up, I accidentally met her eyes. Her expression turned stern, and she slapped me, not hard, but it was enough. She grabbed my cheeks and said, "What did I tell you?" "Sorry, mistress." Once the bar was in position, she raised my hands and secured them to the bar with chains attached to each cuff. She then lifted the bar, positioning my arms above my head, forcing me into a standing position, though not quite on my toes. "Are you going to the doctor anytime soon?" she asked. "No," I answered, uncertain where the question was leading. "Good." She opened what seemed to be a tube of waterproof lipstick and drew hearts around my pointers and the area between my belly button and privates. She walked off and returned with a pink collar, which she placed around my neck. I continued to avoid making eye contact with her. "This is another reminder that you are mine. Now, I want to inspect you. Understand?" I instinctively glanced at her and said, "Yes, mistress," but quickly caught myself. She shot me a stern look and slapped me harder this time. "Since you seem to have a problem with this, I'll need to take care of it." She retrieved the stockings from my bag and used them to blindfold me. "Now, I want to inspect you." "Yes, mistress." She circled around me, her hands touching various parts of my body, occasionally asking me questions about things she noticed. "I have some benign cysts on my thighs that look like large tumors, but are just hard tissue." She asked about them, and I explained. She also inquired about my privates. I told her I had undescended man parts as a child, which were surgically repositioned, though they were still slightly out of place. She commented on how well shaved I was, my chest, underarms, legs, and privates. "Very well done." "Thank you, mistress." I did the best I could with the depilatory cream and regular shaving. I wasn't able to reach much of my back or behind, though. "Sorry." "It's okay. You've done better than most of my other boys." She complimented my pointers, noting how excited they were. Then I heard the faint clink of something metallic. She asked about my pain tolerance, and I told her I thought I could handle quite a bit, depending on the situation. Through gaps in my blindfold, I saw her preparing to attach pointer clamps. I was expecting pain, but this was sharper than I anticipated. I could tolerate slaps, spankings, and even some sharp sensations, but this felt relentless and constant. I wasn't sure if this was how it was supposed to be, or if I was just unusually sensitive. She continued inspecting me, occasionally slapping parts of my body, and then asked, "How do you feel?" I must have looked pale, as I could feel myself getting faint. The sweat on my forehead confirmed it. "Mistress, I think the pointer clamps are more than I can handle." At that moment, I wasn't sure if they were clamps or some kind of piercing, though it didn't make sense for them to be piercings, as no alcohol or anything was applied beforehand. Okay, she said, and started to remove them. Once they were off, she moved away, and I heard the bar being lowered. She freed my hands from the cuffs, led me a few steps forward, and instructed me to kneel. I obeyed. She took off my blindfold and directed me to look at her. She smiled lightly, then helped me into a bowing position, guiding me to focus on my breathing. I knelt there, trying to calm my nerves as she told me to wait. She left, going into the kitchen, and returned with a bottle of water and a bottle of Sunny D, offering them to me. I took the Sunny D, opened the bottle, and began drinking. She set the water nearby and told me, kneel back down and relax. I did as she said, but I could feel my nerves creeping back. She brought over a nearby desk chair, sat down, and rested her feet on me, using me as a footstool. Have you ever heard of human furniture? Yeah, I've read something about it. It can be very interesting. When I have my parties, I think it's fun to have pieces of human furniture around, acting as tables and seats. Sometimes, the people around you even forget you're there and treat you like an object. Do you think that would be fun? Yes, mistress. How are you feeling? Better, mistress, thank you. She leaned forward slightly, stroking me as if petting a dog. I need to take care of my things. She leaned back in the chair and placed her feet in front of me. Can you take off my shoes, please? They were cute, ankle-high, high-heeled shoes. I struggled to unbuckle them, my hands feeling too big for the small clasps and my nerves making my fingers tremble. But I managed to get them off. I looked at her stocking-clad feet. I want a foot massage. I began massaging her feet as best I could, unsure if I was doing it right, still nervous in my role. After a few minutes, she said, that's enough. Kiss them for me, and we can move on. She left and returned with a bottle of nail polish, showing me how to apply it using her pinky finger as an example. It was now my task to paint the rest of her nails. I did my best, and when I finished, she told me I had done a good job and earned my reward, getting dressed. She brought over the rest of my clothing, helped me put on the bra, and adjusted it after I placed the chest forms inside. She looked at me and said, "You do have nice chest." Since the near-fainting incident, I had caught myself looking at her a couple of times. She gave me a stern look each time, but it seemed we had moved past that rule. She lent me a garter for my stockings, even though they stayed up on their own, and zipped up my dress. She looked me up and down and said, "You look pretty good." She then tried to teach me how to walk in the high heels. I did my best, and she said, "Well, you'll get the hang of it." She sat me down on a stool, opened a makeup kit, and began applying makeup to me. As she worked, we chatted, mostly about random things, but also as if we were girlfriends. She asked about my childhood, what led me to explore this experience, and things like that. I relaxed a bit as I opened up to her. It was probably the first time I had ever truly opened up to a woman. She applied foundation, blush, eyeshadow, eyeliner, mascara, lipstick, and even some concealer on my eyebrows. When she was finished, she gave me a brownish blonde wig and helped me up. I looked in the mirror. Well, I looked like a guy in a dress. The clothing looked good, the makeup was well done, and the wig looked natural, but there were just too many masculine features in my face, especially my larger nose. She complimented how I looked, and I played along, feeling that I looked as good as I could under the circumstances. I did like the way my legs looked in the stockings, though. Earlier, we had talked about hair, and I mentioned how much I liked redheads and how I admired her own red hair. As we looked in the mirror, she seemed to have an idea and quickly ran off to an upper room. She returned with a reddish-colored wig. "This is one of my personal ones, not one I use in my sessions, but for you, I'll make an exception." She put the wig on me. It was a bit tight, but overall, it still looked decent. "Can I take some pictures of you?" Not fully thinking clearly, I agreed, later realizing how compromising it was to put myself in that position. She took several pictures of me in different positions around the room, including on one of the Victorian-style couches. She had me sitting, lying down, and in other poses. In one shot, she pulled back the hem of my dress slightly to expose the tops of my stockings. She continued to coach me on how to walk, sit, and even talk. Sometimes, she spoke to me as if we were girlfriends. "We should go shopping sometime to get you more clothes and your own wig. I know some places where no one would care what you're doing. You won't even have to pay me." She glanced at me slyly and asked, "Would you dress for me if we go shopping?" "I'm not sure I'd be comfortable doing that, mistress." She gave me a playful pout. At one point, she had me lie down on an ottoman. "Normally, I'd punish bad boys here, but you've been good, so I won't do that now." As I lay there, she ran her hands over my back, across my butt, and through the crack, grazing my privates and lightly grasping them. She stood back and commented on how feminine the visual was, though she mentioned that the hair still on my butt slightly ruined the effect. After a while of talking, practicing walking, and taking pictures, she instructed me to change back into my men's clothes in the bathroom. "Unless I can convince you to leave dressed like this," she said with a wink. "Sorry, mistress. I don't think I'm comfortable doing that." She gave a playful pout again. She led me to the bathroom, where she pulled out cold cream and other makeup removers. She told me to clean up and change, then come back when I was ready. I did as instructed. Makeup removed, back in my men's clothes, and everything packed up, I returned to the sanctuary. She smiled when I walked over to her, took my hands, and said, "Now, I want you to take the next couple of days to think this over and let it settle with you. I'll contact you, and I want you to tell me how you felt about the session and what you think we could do in a future one, if you decide to have another." I thanked her and told her I would get in touch with her via email. She led me out of the sanctuary and back into the foyer, giving me a warm hug before unlocking the door and letting me out. She made sure to stand out of view of the doorway, just in case any neighbors saw her in her dominatrix outfit. It was an interesting experience. Although I had been active with a girlfriend many years ago, this was probably the closest thing to intimacy I had experienced with a woman. A genuine connection. I don't feel like activity is required for intimacy, sometimes it's about just being open and sharing. I exposed my vulnerabilities and took more risks than I ever thought I could. I mean, when I was chained to that bar and partially suspended, what stopped her from running off with my keys in my car? What kept her from putting those pictures of me online? Yet, somehow, I got through my anxieties and trusted her. A few days later, we had some nice correspondence. She sent me the pictures she had taken, which I stored in a password-protected file on my computer. It was a fun and interesting experience, one I participated in again just a few weeks before writing this. In that session, I shared more emotionally with her and had even practiced walking femininely and put together a nice outfit, including buying a pair of low-heeled boots. Before that session, I had struggled with matching clothes and figuring out my sizes. She took on her dominatrix role and told me not to make excuses, providing me with resources to figure out my sizes. During the second session, I also bought some hip shapers to give me a more feminine figure, and she mentioned that someday we might need to use a corset. The second session was just as engaging as the first, though less focused on physical sensations. There was some spanking, but nothing too intense, and we spent less time on getting dressed. Another instance where I put myself in a highly compromising position was when she placed a sensory deprivation mask on me, locked me inside a small cage, and suspended it for a few minutes. Strangely, while inside, suspended and hearing what sounded like the cage spinning, I didn't feel as anxious or freaked out as I expected. She took more pictures of me, and we talked and shared some moments. She once again suggested that we go shopping together. She even tried to get me to paint my toenails, but I wasn't comfortable with that. It was another intense experience, one that surprised me as I learned more about myself. I can't help but wish I could be in a relationship where I could share these aspects of myself openly, to have someone claim me in this way, because I genuinely enjoy it. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel.